Chapter 3 of the Lancashire Witches. This recording is in the public domain. Reading by Andy Minter. The Lancashire Witches, a Romance of Pendle Forest, by William Harrison Ainsworth. Introduction. The Last Abbot of Whaley. Chapter 3 Whaley Abbey. A sad, sad change hath come over the fair Abbey of Whaley. It knoweth its old masters no longer. For upwards of 2 centuries and a half hath the blessed place grown in beauty and riches. 17 abbots have exercised unbounded hospitality within it, but now they are all gone, save one, and he is attainted of felony and treason. The grave monk walketh no more in the cloisters, nor seeketh his pallet in the dormitory. Vesper or matin song resound not as of old within the fine conventual church. Stripped are the altars of their silver crosses, and the shrines of their votive offerings and saintly relics. Pyx and chalice, thurible and vial, golden-headed pastoral staff and mitre embossed with pearls, candlestick and Christmas ship of silver, salver, basin and ewer, all are gone. The splendid sacristy hath been despoiled. A sad, sad change hath come over Whaley Abbey. The libraries, well stocked with reverend tomes, have been pillaged, and their contents cast to the flames, and thus long-laboured manuscript, the fruit of years of patient industry, with gloriously illuminated missal, are irrecoverably lost. The large infirmary no longer receiveth the sick. In the locutory sitteth no more the guest. No longer in the mighty kitchens are prepared the prodigious supply of meats, destined for the support of the poor, or the entertainment of the traveller. No kindly porter stands at the gate, to bid the stranger enter and partake of the munificent abbot's hospitality, but a churlish guard bids him hie away, and menaces him, if he tarries, with his halbert. Closed are the buttery hatches and the pantries, and the daily dole of bread hath ceased. Closed also to the brethren is the refectory. The cellarer's office is ended. The strong ale, which he brewed in October, is tapped in March by roystering troopers. The rich muscadel and malmsey, and the wines of Gascoigne and the Rhine, are no longer quaffed by the abbot and his more honoured guests, but drunk to his destruction by his foes. The great gallery, 150 feet in length, the pride of the abbot's lodging, and a model of architecture, is filled, not with white-robed ecclesiastics, but with an armed earl and his retainers. Neglected is the little oratory dedicated to Our Lady of Whaley, where night and morn the abbot used to pray. All the old religious and hospitable uses of the abbey are forgone. The reverend stillness of the cloisters, scarce broken by the quiet tread of the monks, is now disturbed by armed heel and clank of sword, while in its saintly courts are heard the ribald song, the profane jest, and the angry brawl. Of the brethren, only those tenanting the cemetery are left. All else are gone, driven forth as vagabonds, with stripes and curses, to seek refuge where they may. A sad, sad change has come over Whaley Abbey. In the plenitude of its pride and power has it been cast down, desecrated, despoiled. Its treasures are carried off, its ornaments sold, its granaries emptied, its possessions wasted, its storehouses sacked, its cattle slaughtered and sold. But though stripped of its wealth and splendour, though deprived of all the religious graces that, like rich incense, lent an odour to the fane, its external beauty is yet unimpaired, and its vast proportions undiminished. A stately pile was Whaley, one of the loveliest as well as the largest in the realm. Carefully had it been preserved by its reverend rulers, and where reparations or additions were needed, they were judiciously made. Thus age had lent it beauty, by mellowing its freshness and toning its hues, while no decay was perceptible. Without a struggle had it yielded to the captor, so that no part of its wide belt of walls or towers, though so strongly constructed as to have offered effectual resistance, were injured. Never had Whaley Abbey looked more beautiful than on a bright clear morning in March, when this sad change had been wrought, and when, from a peaceful monastic establishment, it had been converted into a menacing fortress. The sunlight sparkled upon its grey walls, and filled its three great quadrangular courts with light and life, piercing the exquisite carving of its cloisters, and revealing all the intricate beauty and combinations of the arches. Stains of painted glass fell upon the floor of the magnificent conventual church, and dyed with rainbow hues the marble tombs of the Lacies, the founders of the establishment, brought thither when the monastery was removed from Stanlaw in Cheshire, and upon the brass-covered gravestones of the abbots in the presbytery. There lay Gregory de Northbury, 8th abbot of Stanlaw and 1st of Whalley, and William Rede, the last abbot, but there was never to lie John Paslew. The slumber of the ancient prelates was soon to be disturbed, and the sacred structure within which they had so often worshipped upreared by sacrilegious hands. But all was bright and beauteous now, and if no solemn strains were heard in the holy pile, its stillness was scarcely less reverential and awe-inspiring. The old abbey wreathed itself in all its attractions, as if to welcome back its former ruler, whereas it was only to receive him as a captive doomed to a felon's death. But this was outward show. Within, all was terrible preparation. Such was the discontented state of the country, that, fearing some new revolt, the Earl of Derby had taken measures for the defence of the abbey, and along the wide circling walls of the close were placed ordnance and men, and within the grange stores of ammunition. A strong guard was set at each of the gates, and the courts were filled with troops. The bray of the trumpet echoed within the close, where rounds were set for the archers, and martial music resounded within the area of the cloisters. Over the great north-eastern gateway, which formed the chief entrance to the abbot's lodging, floated the royal banner. Despite these warlike proceedings, the fair abbey smiled beneath the sun, in all, or more than all, its pristine beauty, its green hills sloping gently down towards it, and the clear and sparkling Calder dashing merrily over the stones at its base. But upon the bridge, and by the river side, and within the little village, many persons were assembled, conversing gravely and anxiously together, and looking out towards the hills, where other groups were gathered, as if in expectation of some afflicting event. Most of these were herdsmen and farming men, but some among them were poor monks in the white habits of the Cistercian brotherhood, but which were now stained and threadbare, while their countenances bore traces of severest privation and suffering. All the herdsmen and farmers had been retainers of the abbot. The poor monks looked wistfully at their former habitation, but replied not, except by a gentle bowing of the head, to the cruel scoffs and taunts with which they were greeted by the passing soldiers. But the sturdy rustics did not bear these outrages so tamely, and more than one brawl ensued, in which blood flowed, while the ruffianly arquebussier would have been drowned in the Calder, but for the exertions to save him of a monk whom he had attacked. This took place on the 11th of March, 1537, more than 3 months after the date of the watching by the beacon before recorded; and the event, anticipated by the concourse without the abbey, as well as by those within its walls, was the arrival of Abbot Paslew and Fathers Eastgate and Haydock, who were to be brought on that day from Lancaster, and executed on the following morning before the abbey, according to sentence passed upon them. The gloomiest object in the picture remains to be described, but yet it is necessary to its completion. This was a gallows of unusual form and height, erected on the summit of a gentle hill, rising immediately in front of the abbot's lodgings, called the Holehouses, whose rounded, bosomy beauty it completely destroyed. This terrible apparatus of condign punishment was regarded with abhorrence by the rustics, and it required a strong guard to be kept constantly round it to preserve it from demolition. Amongst a group of rustics collected on the road leading to the north east gateway was Cuthbert Ashbeed, who, having been deprived of his forester's office, was now habited in a friezed doublet and hose, with a short camlet cloak on his shoulder, and a fox skin cap, embellished with the grinning jaws of the beast, on his head. "Eh, Ruchot o' Roaph's," he observed to a bystander, "that's a fearfo sight, that gallows. Yo han been up to t' toll houses to take a look at it, belike?" "No, no, ey dunna loike such sights," replied Ruchot o' Roaph's. "Beside, there wur a great rabblement at t' gate, and one o' them Lunges archer chaps knocked me up nob wi' his pike, an towd me he'd hong me wi' t' abbut if ey didna keep out o' t' way." "And served to right too, the crunnly carle," cried Ashbead, doubling his horny fists. "Odds flesh! why didna yo ha' a tussle wi' him? My hont's a itching for a bout wi' t' heretic robbers. Well a day! well a day! That we should live to see t' holy feythers driven like hummer bees out o' t' own nests. Why, they say'n that King Harry had declared there were to ha' no more monks o' friars i' all Englandshire. Only think o' that! And dunna yo know that t' Abbots o' Jervaux and Salley were honged o' Tize's day at Lancaster Castle?" "Good Lord just bless us!" exclaimed a sturdy hind. "We'n a protty king. First he chops off his wife's head, and then hongs aw t' priests. What'll t' world come to?" "Eh, bite an' mess, what win it come to?" cried Ruchot o' Roaph's. "But we darena oppen our mouths for fear o' a gog." "No, belady, but ey stoppen mine wide enough," cried Ashbead; "and if a dozen o' yo chaps win join me, ey'n try to set poor Abbot free when they brings him here." "Ey'd as lief bide till to morrow," said Ruchot o' Roaph's, uneasily. "Eh, thou art a timorsome tyke, as ey towd te before," replied Ashbead. "But what dost thou say, Hal o' Nabs?" he added, to the sturdy hind who had recently spoken. "I han spilt t' last drop o' my blood in t' old abbot's cause," replied Hal o' Nabs. "We winna stand by and see him honged like a dog. Abbot Paslew to t' rescue, lads!" "Ay, Abbot Paslew to t' rescue!" responded all the others, except Ruchot o' Roaph's. "This must be prevented," muttered a voice near them, and immediately afterwards a tall man quitted the group. "Wha wur it spoke?" cried Hal o' Nabs. "Oh, ey seen that he witch, Nick Demdike." "Nick Demdike here!" cried Ashbead, looking round in alarm. "Has he o'erheerd us?" "Like enow," replied Hal o' Nabs; "boh ey didna moind him afore." "Nor ey neither," cried Ruchot o' Roaph's, crossing himself, and spitting on the ground. "Our Lady o' Whaley shield us fro' t' warlock!" "Talking o' Nick Demdike," cried Hal o' Nabs, "yo had a strange adventure wi' him i' t' neet o' t' great brast o' Pendle Hill, hadna yo, Cuthbert?" "Yeigh, t' firrups tak him if ey hadden," replied Ashbead. "Thou'st hear aw about it, if t' will. Ey wur sent by t' abbot down t' hill to Owen o' Gab's, o' Perkins o' Dannel's, o' Nowell's, o' Humphrey's orchard, i' Worston Lane, to look efter him. Weel, when ey gets ower t' stone wall, what dun yo think ey sees? 20 or 30 pikemen standin' behind it, an they dashes at me as thick as a sleeter, an efore ey con roar out, they blindfoldet me, and clap a nine gog i' my mouth. Well, ey con neither speak nor see, boh ey con use my feet, so ey punches at 'em reet and left, and, by my troth, lads, yo'd ha' loiked to hear how they roared, or ey should ha' roared too, if ey could'n, when they began to thwack me wi' their rattling pows, and ding me so about the head that ey fell back i' a swound. When ey come to, ey wur lying on my back i' Rimington Moor, every bone i' my hide racked, and my hair wur clotted wi' gore, boh t' bond and gag wur gone. So ey gets to my feet, and daddles along as well as ey con, when aw at once ey spies a leaf glenting afore me, and a douncing about like an orfra or will o' the wisp. Thinks ey that's Friar Rush and his lantern, and he'll lead me into a quagmire. So ey stops a bit to consider where ey'd gotten, for ey didn't know t' reet road exactly. But when ey stood still, t' leet stood still too, and then ey made out that it come from an owd ruint tower, and what ey'd fancied wur one lantern proved 20, for when ey reached t' tower, and peeped in through a broken window,
I beheld a sight I'd ne'er forget. A pack of witches ay, witches sitting in a ring, with their broomsticks and lanterns about 'em." "Good Lorjus days!" cried Hal o' Nabs. "And what else didst thou see, mon?" "Why," replied Ashbead, "t'owd hags had a little figure i' the midst of 'em, moulded o' clay, representing t' Abbot o' Whalley. I knowed it by t' mitre and crosier. And after each o' t' varmint had stuck a pin in its heart, a tall black mon stepped forward, and tied a cord round its throttle, and honked it up." "A black man!" cried Hal o' Nabs, breathlessly. "T' black mon wur Nick Demdike?" "Yo'n guessed it," replied Ashbead. "'Twere he." I wur so glopp'nt I couldna speak, and my blood froze i' my veins, when I heerd a fearfu' voice ask Nick wheere his wife and chilt were. 'The infant is unbaptised,' wrote t' voice. 'At the next meeting it must be sacrificed. See that thou bring it.' Demdike then bowed to summat I couldna see, and asked when t' next meeting were to be held. 'On the night of Abbot Paslew's execution,' answered t' voice. On hearing this I could bear no longer, but shouted out, 'Witches! Devils! Lord deliver us from you!' and as I spoke I tried to burst through t' window. In the trice all t' lights went out. There were a great rush to t' door, a whirring around the air like a covey of partridges fleeing off, and then I heard nowt more, for a great stone fell on my sconce, and knocked me down senseless. When I come to, I were in Nick Demdike's cottage, wi' his wife waiting o'er me, and the unbaptised chilt in her arms."
All exclamations of wonder on the part of the rustics, and inquiries as to the issue of the adventure, were checked by the approach of a monk, who, joining the assemblage, called their attention to a priestly train slowly advancing along the road. "It is headed," he said, "by Fathers Chatburn and Chester, late bursars of the abbey. Alack! alack! they now need the charity themselves which they once so lavishly bestowed on others." "Waes me!" ejaculated Ashbead. "Mony a broad merk ha' ey gotten fro' them." "They've been kind to us aw," added the others. "Next come Father Burnley, granger, and Father Haworth, cellarer," pursued the monk, "and after them Father Dinkley, sacristan, and Father Moore, porter." "Yo remember Feyther Moore, lads?" cried Ashbead. "Yeigh, to be sure we done," replied the others. "A good mon, a great good mon. He never sent away t' poor, no he." "After Father Moore," said the monk, pleased with their warmth, "comes Father Forrest, the procurator, with Fathers Reed, Clough, and Bancroft, and the procession is closed by Father Smith, the late prior." "Down o' your whirly bones, lad, as t' holy feythers pass," cried Ashbead, "and crave their blessing." And as the priestly train slowly approached, with heads bowed down, and looks fixed sadly on the ground, the rustic assemblage fell upon their knees, and implored their benediction. The foremost in the procession passed on in silence, but the prior stopped, and, extending his hand over the kneeling group, cried in a solemn voice "Heaven bless ye, my children. You are about to witness a sad spectacle. You will see him who hath clothed you, fed you, and taught you the way to heaven, brought hither a prisoner, to suffer a shameful death." "But we'st set him free, holy prior," cried Ashbead. "We'n made up our minds to it. You just wait till he comes." "Nay, I command you to desist from the attempt, if any such you meditate," rejoined the prior. "It will avail nothing, and you will only sacrifice your own lives. Our enemies are too strong. The abbot himself would give you like counsel." Scarcely were the words uttered, than from the great gate of the abbey there issued a dozen arquebussiers, with an officer at their head, who marched directly towards the kneeling hinds, evidently with the intention of dispersing them. Behind them strode Nicholas Demdike. In an instant the alarmed rustics were on their feet, and Roger Ralphs and some few among them took to their heels; but Ashbeed, Hal o' Nabs, with half a dozen others, stood their ground manfully. The monks remained, in the hope of preventing any violence. Presently the halberdiers came up. "That is the ringleader," cried the officer, who proved to be Richard Assheton, pointing out Ashbeed. "Seize him." "No mon shall lay honts on me," cried Cuthbert; and as the guard pushed past the monks to execute their leader's order, he sprang forward, and wresting a halbert from the foremost of them, stood upon his defence. "Seize him, I say," shouted Assheton, irritated at the resistance offered. "Keep off," cried Ashbeed. "Your best. Like a stag at bay, I am dangerous. Wear horns, I say." The arquebussiers looked irresolute. It was evident Ashbead would only be taken with life, and they were not sure that it was their leader's purpose to destroy him. "Put down thy weapon, Cuthbert," interposed the prior. "It will avail thee nothing against odds like these." "Maybe, holy prior," rejoined Ashbead, flourishing the pike, "but I must only yield with my life." "I will disarm him," cried Demdike, stepping forward. "No," retorted Ashbead, with a scornful laugh. "Come on, then. Hadst all the fiends i' hell at thy back, I shouldna fear thee." "Yield!" cried Demdike, in a voice of thunder, and fixing a terrible glance upon him. "Come on, wizard," rejoined Ashbead, undauntedly; but observing that his opponent was wholly unarmed, he gave the pike to Hal o' Nabs, who was close beside him, observing, "It shall never be said that Cuthbert Ashbead fought to duel himself unfairly. Now touch me if thou darest." Demdike required no further provocation. With almost supernatural force and quickness, he sprang upon the forester, and seized him by the throat. But the active young man freed himself from the gripe, and closed with his assailant. But though of Herculean build, it soon became evident that Ashbead would have the worst of it, when Hal o' Nabs, who had watched the struggle with intense interest, could not help coming to his friend's assistance, and made a push at Demdike with the halbert. Could it be that the wrestlers shifted their position, or that the wizard was indeed aided by the powers of darkness? None could tell, but so it was that the pike pierced the side of Ashbead, who instantly fell to the ground with his adversary upon him. The next instant his hold relaxed, and the wizard sprang to his feet unarmed, but deluged in blood. Hal o' Nabs uttered a cry of keenest anguish, and flinging himself upon the body of the forester, tried to staunch the wound. But he was quickly seized by the arquebussiers, and his hands tied behind his back with a thong, while Ashbead was lifted up and borne towards the abbey, the monks and rustics following slowly after, but the latter were not permitted to enter the gate. As the unfortunate keeper, who by this time had become insensible from loss of blood, was carried along the walled enclosure leading to the abbot's lodgings, a female, with a child in her arms, was seen approaching from the opposite side. She was tall, finely formed, with features of remarkable beauty, though of a masculine and somewhat savage character, and with magnificent but fierce black eyes. Her skin was dark, and her hair raven black, contrasting strongly with the red band wound around it. Her kirtle was of murrey coloured serge, simply but becomingly fashioned. A glance sufficed to show her how matters stood with poor Ashbead, and uttering a sharp, angry cry, she rushed forward. "What have you done?" she cried, fixing a keen, reproachful look on Demdike, who walked beside the wounded man. "Nothing," replied Demdike, with a bitter laugh. "The fool has been hurt with a pike. Stand out of the way, Bess, and let the men pass. They are about to carry him to the cell under the chapter house." "You shall not take him there," cried Bess Demdike, fiercely. "He may recover if his wound be dressed. Let him go to the infirmary. Ha! I forgot there is no one there now." "Father Mancroft is at the gate," observed one of the arquebussiers. "He used to act as surgeon at the abbey."
"No monk must enter the gate, except the prisoners when they arrive," observed Assheton. "Such are the positive orders of the Earl of Derby."
"It is not needed," observed Demdike. "No human aid can save the man." "But can other aid save him?" said Bess, breathing the words in her husband's ears. "Go to!" cried Demdike, pushing her roughly aside. "Wouldst have me save thy lover?" "Take heed," said Bess, in a deep whisper. "If thou save him not, by the devil thou servest, thou shalt lose me and thy child." Demdike did not think it proper to contest the point, but, approaching Assheton, requested that the wounded man might be conveyed to an arched recess, which he pointed out. Assent being given, Ashbeed was taken there, and placed upon the ground, after which the arquebussiers and their leader marched off, while Bess, kneeling down, supported the head of the wounded man upon her knee, and Demdike, taking a small phial from his doublet, poured some of its contents down his throat. The wizard then took a fold of linen, with which he was likewise provided, and dipping it in the elixir, applied it to the wound. In a few moments Ashbeed opened his eyes, and, looking round wildly, fixed his gaze upon Bess, who placed her finger upon her lips to enjoin silence, but he could not or would not understand the sign.
"Oh, so wi' me, Bess," he groaned; "but I'd rayther dee thus wi' thee beside me than any other way." "Hush!" exclaimed Bess. "Nicholas is here." "Oh, I see," replied the wounded man, looking round. "But what matters it? I'st be gone soon. Ah, Bess, dear lass, if thou'dst promise to break thy compact wi' Satan, to repent and save thy precious soul, I should die content."
"Oh, do not talk thus," cried Bess. "You will soon be well again."
"Listen to me,"
continued Ashbead, earnestly.
"Dost nah know that if thy babe be na baptised afore to morrow neet, it'll be sacrificed to t' Prince o' Darkness? Go to summat t' holy fathers, confess thy sins, and implore heaven's forgiveness. Mayhap they'll save thee and thy infant."
"And be warned as a witch," rejoined Bess, fiercely. "It is useless, Cuthbert. I have tried them all. I have knelt to them, implored them, but their hearts are as hard as flints. They will not heed me. They will not disobey the abbot's cruel injunction, though he be their superior no longer. But I shall be avenged on him, terribly avenged."
"Leave me, thou wicked woman,"
cried Ashbead.
"I dunna wish to hear thee no more. Let me dee i' peace."
"Thou wilt not die, I tell thee, Cuthbert," cried Bess. "Nicholas hath staunched thy wound."
"He staunched it, say'st thou?"
cried Ashbead, rising.
"I'd never owe my life to him."
And before he could be prevented, he tore off the bandage, and the blood burst forth anew. "It is not my fault if he perishes now," observed Demdike, moodily.
"Help him, help him!"
implored Bess.
"He shanna touch me,"
cried Ashbead, struggling and increasing the effusion.
"Keep him off, I adjure thee. Farewell, Bess,"
he added, sinking back utterly exhausted by the effort.
"Cuthbert!"
screamed Bess, terrified by his looks. "Cuthbert, art thou really dying? Look at me. Speak to me." "Ah!" she cried, as if seized by a sudden idea. "They say the blessing of a dying man will avail. Bless my child, Cuthbert. Bless it."
"Give it to me,"
groaned the forester. Bess held the infant towards him, but before he could place his hands upon it, all power forsook him, and he fell back and expired.
"Lost, lost for ever lost!"
cried Bess, with a wild shriek. At this moment a loud blast was blown from the gate tower, and a trumpeter called out, "The abbot and 2 other prisoners are coming." "To thy feet, wench!" cried Demdike, imperiously, and seizing the bewildered woman by the arm. "To thy feet, and come with me to meet him." CHAPTER 4